good to see all of you. We are so excited to have Jessica Fong here for today's CFE community chat. We have hosted more than 20 of these since last April, a brand new initiative for us in the last year. It's gone really well. We've been able to bring in some incredible resources and experts and, sort of across the field and different areas. And it's just been a really wonderful experience for us and hopefully the community as well. So for those of you who are new to the Chicago Foundation for Education, I'm Sarah Hoppy-Knight. I'm the co-executive director of the organization. We're a Chicago-based education nonprofit that's been around for about 37 years, supporting and funding CPS educators so they can best serve their students and grow in the profession. We've been awarding grants and fellowships and offering professional growth opportunities to CPS pre-K through 12th grade educators consistently over that almost 4-decade period. We also know how incredibly mentally and physically exhausting your days are, particularly considering all of the added challenges and emotional turmoil associated with this past year plus. And we're just so very glad that you chose to spend some time with us this afternoon. So without further ado, just a few quick notes and then we will get started with Jessica. If you have questions during today's session, you're welcome to pop them in the chat box, or if you want to and feel comfortable, you can speak them aloud. So Jessica, our presenter, would sort of prefer that people just unmute themselves. It'll be a relatively small group. And so you can ask questions through the chat box, but if you feel comfortable, she would prefer it to be more of a conversational environment today. The session's also being recorded, which you probably saw when you came in to the room. And the recording itself will be posted along with the slide deck and associated resources on our website's resource roundup section by the end of the week. And also just keep an eye out in that chat box for a couple of helpful messages throughout the session from Kayla, who's my program associate. So let's get into it. Our presenter today, Jessica Fong, is a dual language pre-K teacher at CPS's Velma Thomas Early Childhood Center in McKinley Park. She's been an early childhood educator for more than 10 years and loves working with the littlest learners. She's also deeply committed to providing inquiry and nature-based education to communities of color that have been historically denied access to these progressive pedagogies. She has presented about nature play to national and international audiences in an effort to equip adults with the tools necessary to bring nature play to more children across the globe. So Jessica, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. I see some familiar faces as well. Oh, I meant to put in my headphones so that my voice is a little clearer. Sorry, it's right here. Hold on. I thought I was ready. But yes, Sarah mentioned that I'd love this to be a conversation. It is a community chat. So I'd really love, any questions or comments to just come directly. Feel free to turn on your mic if you're comfortable with that. But and make this more of a chat. Let me plug in real quick.
There we go. All right, perfect. Let me make sure. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Here we go. Right there. You'd think after all these years of doing this, right? Or at least a year. Here we go. All right, thumbs up if you can see it. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this chat is titled Mirrors and Windows, Teacher Identity in the Early Childhood Classroom. But I do want to say that this doesn't apply just to early childhood. Teacher identity, I think, is very important, 0 all the way up to adult learners and beyond. When you're teaching any group of either children or adults, I think it's really important that you reflect on your own identity and think about your identity, which we will talk about further in a moment. But I want to tell you a little bit first about who I am. And as Sarah also read in my bio, and you can see there, I'm dedicated to be an anti-racist early childhood teacher and parent. And there's my Instagram if you ever want to check it out. But I want to start this chat with the thought that my truth is just that, it's my truth. And what I'm going to share with you are my experiences and my understanding of things. And they're not the end all be all in any way, shape, or form. The Italian people of the Reggio approach that I'll talk to you about in a few slides always say that. And they always bring that home, that it's their experiences, their beliefs, their understandings. But there are multiple experiences and many ways of approaching things and many ways of understanding things and many truths. So just that, I wanted to throw that out there. There may be moments where you have some strong feelings about some of the stuff that we'll talk about, and that's okay. That's part of this process, right? This is not a chat about, how to create a craft with young children or something relatively more straightforward. We're talking about teacher identity, which sometimes stirs some feelings. And the reason that I came to this sort of thought about teacher identity and why it's so important is through my own experiences as a dual language educator and helping develop dual language programs in 2 schools now, both CPS schools, and really reflecting about my experience in bilingual education or the lack thereof. So as a child in elementary, pre-K, all of that, I was part of the generation and many generations before me and after me still that were sink or swim. So there was no bilingual education. There were no supports for children who spoke other languages. You either learned English or you didn't, and you failed. And so when I started to help develop dual language education programs at schools and also helping my son, become a dual language person, I really started to think about and reflect about my experience as a sink or swim student and how much was taken away from me as a bilingual person. The trauma of that, not having that language to speak with fellow family members and with fellow people in the community, being made fun of, when I would go to Guatemala, because I did have some Spanish, but it wasn't the greatest. And feeling that shame that your own family makes fun of your Spanish. And then feeling the shame again in high school when I took Spanish language classes to try to learn Spanish, how to read it and write it. And feeling that shame again when students would make fun of me and say, "Why are you in this class? You're Guatemalan. You should speak Spanish. It's not fair. It's an easy A for you." And so really having those moments of self-reflection as I was helping develop these programs and again, helping support my child, made me think about how important it is to know yourself and to really deep dive into those things that are difficult, those things that are traumatic, those things that are who you are, who make you who you are. So mirrors and windows. So let's talk a little bit about what that is before we get into. So we'll talk a little bit about what mirrors and windows are. We'll talk a little bit about the Reggio Emilia approach and the roots of social justice in that approach to early childhood. And obviously teacher identity is interwoven in all of this. And hopefully we'll have some time to look at those articles that I sent out. I have, the articles here. I know it was a lot of reading and it was last minute. So if you didn't read them, that's okay. But if you did get a chance, hopefully we'll have time to also chat about those. So mirrors and windows is a concept that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, a Black woman, developed around children's literature. And so her idea around children's literature was that the literature in your classroom and the literature that you expose young children to and all children to should be a mirror to themselves. So it holds up a mirror to themselves. So it should represent them. It should show their experiences. It should show their culture and their family as a mirror. But then it should also be, other literature should also be windows into other people's experiences and their lives. And so other people have taken this concept from Dr. Bishop and expanded it to other fields, particularly in education. But I wanted to take this idea into teacher identity and really think about the mirrors and windows that you provide for yourself and that you look for and that you search for and that you confront as a teacher in developing your
Okay, I think we lost Jessica. Let's just 1 1 second here. Sorry about this, folks. Okay, she popped out, so hopefully she'll pop right back in. Just a moment. Thank you, Kayla. So Kayla shared those 2 articles that Jessica had sent out prior. Exactly. So those would be, this would probably be a good time to take a look at those if you haven't had a chance to prior to this. We will pick right back up when she comes back on. Thank you for being patient. Here she comes. Here we are.
Hi, was that just me or did everyone get kicked out?
It was just you.
Oh no.
No, it's okay. Kayla had a great idea and she popped those 2 PDFs in the chat. So if people didn't have a chance to take a look, they had another chance.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I got. Well, if it happens again, read the article. Hopefully this isn't happening again. Okay, so I was talking about the windows for white teachers is working with children of color, students of color are particularly important to learn about your students' lived experiences there and beyond the superficial, right? We want to think beyond Jackie Robinson, beyond Rosa Parks, beyond Martin Luther King Jr., right? What are their experiences? What is their life like? What are your assumptions and biases about your students' lived experiences and their stories? And then really also thinking about, this is particularly important again for white teachers, is to think about your privilege as a white person and the systemic racism and structures that have afforded you your privilege and that continue to keep your students of color oppressed, right? And I just highlight this because I think it's important to say, and it's important to note, not to say that any teacher's work is more important than other teachers' work in terms of their self-reflection, but I think it's something that needs to be said. So this is a quote from Ezra Hyland. So he's a National Council of Teachers of English member. And he says, "When I know the stories of my people and my culture, that's when I become human myself." So I think it's imperative that we learn about our stories and the stories of our people, you know, going back again to the things that make you react, to the things that you lived as a person, as a child, as a student, and really understand where those come from and how it affects you as a teacher, and both the good and the bad. You know, as a person of color, my entire educational experience has been, you know, hammered. I've had hammered home all of the terrible things about being a person of color, right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, in school, like a movie about slavery, and movies about people of color's suffering and all of that. And so really, as I look at my journey in becoming an anti-racist educator, I think I focus right now more on the joy and the Black excellence and the Latinx excellence and the Asian excellence, because my educational experience was all about the opposite of that. And, you know, a non-white, teacher of color, a non-person of color, right? Maybe their focus then would be the excellence, because they were in the same classrooms I was, watching those videos about slavery, but there weren't any videos about Black excellence and Latinx excellence and all of those things. So really knowing the stories of your people, both the good and the bad, and your culture, both the good and the bad, and really centering the stories of your students, who most likely will be children of color. So this is just something I put together as I was thinking about this idea of your identity, teacher identity, and I thought about it as a cycle. So I just made this up, guys. It could make sense, it could not make sense, but it made sense to me. And the center of it is this idea of preserving and fostering children's cultural identity. And all of the stuff around it is what you as an educator do to get to fostering this and to becoming an anti-racist educator and to really supporting your students, because research has found that children as early as kindergarten, and I would probably guess even before that, begin to lose their cultural identities. And then this is a direct quote: they can perceive themselves as inferior to the dominant group and or lose their desire to maintain their culture when they are taught by a teacher of a different cultural identity, especially. I put the word especially in there, but I'll put that resource in the things that will be provided by CFE, so everyone can look that up. But so it's really important that we help preserve and foster our students of color's cultural identity, and I think these 4 pieces are that cycle of how to support that. And one of those, and what we're talking about today, is that teacher identity work and self-reflection. So that's one of the pieces. Another piece is shifting your perspective to center your students and their families' experiences. And this applies to all teachers. If I was a teacher teaching a majority Black children, I would then center their lives and their experiences, right? And even as a Latinx educator, I teach mostly children who are of Mexican and Mexican American descent, and so I center their experiences as Mexican people, which is very different, not very different, but somewhat different from my experience as a Guatemalan person. So shifting your perspective and really centering your students in every step of the work that you do. I know that we as teachers are given this curriculum sometimes that we have to follow, we have to meet these certain standards, and the piece of that of sort of upholding these oppressive systems is for another chat, because that's also an issue, right? That we're forced to do these curriculums that are not culturally sensitive or not culturally centering children. But you can always find pieces where you center Black people joy, where you center Black excellence or Latinx excellence or Asian people or Indigenous people excellence in everything that you do. So if you're teaching a science lesson, and I'm getting a little off track, but if you're teaching a science lesson, you find those scientists of color to share to your children instead of always the same folks that we all learned about in science class. And then learning about various cultures and experiences and knowledge and applying them to your practice. So learning about these things is one step, but then applying it. And so I was talking a little bit about how to apply that in a quick way, sort of a quick and dirty way with that example. But and then student identity work and self-reflection is also very important to provide that space for all children and young children to really think about who they are themselves and who their families are and what their stories are. And reflecting on themselves. And even children as young as pre-K, I work with pre-K, can absolutely think about themselves and think about their identities and who they are and reflect on who they are. So Jarrell Guy is a baker. She's a Black woman baker was nominated for a James Beard Award, and I just saw a little piece about her on Netflix. And she said, when you understand your history and understand where you come from, that understanding gives you purpose. So as an educator, and I think this is why teacher identity is so important and teacher self-reflection is so important, it gives you purpose. Not only just knowing, I know in undergrad and grad, they always make you write your educational philosophy, right? but really digging into who you are, what your experiences are, and how you react in the classroom based on those experiences. Because we want to push ourselves beyond reacting to being really intentional about what we teach. And I think one of the ways that you can go from reaction to intentionality is to really think about who you are. Because when those things come up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit with the article about, you know, the child who said, do worms have penises? When those things come up, you're not caught off guard. You've thought about, what do I think about gender? What do I think about, what do my experiences tell me about gender? What do I want to unlearn about the things that I learned about gender and racism and sexism and all of those things? One of the things that I put in the description about for this workshop was this concept of remothering. And that's a concept in the sort of abolitionist and anti-racist parenting circles, where you're unlearning what you yourself were taught as a child about these topics, about gender, about equality, about racism, about sexism. And so I think of it as like remothering yourself as a teacher so that you can be the best teacher that you can be for your students, and unpacking all of these things that make up who you are, and beyond the superficial, right? Thinking about beyond the superficial. What are those things that really, when a student says something, they just make you either, you know, are taken aback or you brush past it. And why do you do that? And I'll give you guys a little bit of time to think about maybe an example of that in your own experiences a little bit later. So you always think about what experiences you've faced, and what impact these experiences have on your teaching and what you bring into the classroom. And so these things, they really give you purpose when you understand your story, yourself, your identity. It gives you a purpose beyond the surface educational philosophies, right, that we were talking about, that we all had to write in our bachelor's and master's programs. So I thought, as I was thinking this through, and I really like to come up with images. I think it's a little bit more powerful than just text on the screen. And I thought this concept, right, you know, in this moment in time, I think the prism really sort of exemplifies what I'm trying to get through. This idea that everything that students experience in your classroom is filtered through you, right? You're the adult in the room. The children will look to you to guide them, to help lead them, to help them understand things. And so everything that you are, everything that make up who you are, everything that makes up your identity, the children's experiences and what they experience as students goes through you, goes through your identity. And so you, as the prism, really need to know who you are when children come to you with questions, when they come to you with learning that they want, when things happen in the classroom, when you encounter curriculum that you need to teach. What is this filter? What's going to happen when it goes through you? And what are you going to decide you provide your students? Because at the end of the day, you as the teacher can stop learning from happening, right? You can prevent children from thinking about gender, sexism, racism, all of those things, because it's uncomfortable, right? And I want to acknowledge that it is uncomfortable. This is difficult. These are things that, as a teacher, are not taught in teacher education coursework. So at the end of the day, you could stop that, but you could also be the one that provides them this moment of learning that they wouldn't otherwise have, and really start to shift the narrative, not only for that one particular student and the learning of that one particular student, but of all of the children in your classroom. And then as that reverberates out to maybe the community, maybe your whole school. And I like to think that maybe even shifting history a little bit if we all start to do this work intentionally. So I want you to think about now that question that I had put in the description of this chat. How do you think your personal and professional experiences shape what your students experience in your classroom? Right? So is there a moment that, you know, maybe you were raised, I'm going to throw an example out there, hopefully no one gets mad at me, but, you know, maybe you were raised Catholic, right? And homosexuality is bad, right, in the Catholic Church. And so maybe you encountered a student who had a different perspective, or maybe they asked questions about that. Maybe you encountered a picture book. There are now picture books, really great picture books about children who are transgender, or children who have 2 daddies and 2 mommies, right? What happened when you encountered that? And how did you feel about it? Why did you react the way you did? And so this is just a moment of your own self-reflection as we talk about self-reflection and your identity, to think about those sorts of things in this moment. I know that we all have taken this time out of our day, and so I do definitely want to acknowledge that. And I want to give you a few moments right now, if that's okay. I know silence is a little difficult for folks, to really think about that. It hasn't been that long, but does anyone want to share an experience or a moment in their classroom? If not, that's fine. I know it's difficult.
Jessica, we do have a comment in the chat. Are you able to see?
I can move over there. Yeah, hold on one second.
I can read it.
Yeah, no, oh, I found it. Thank you. I'll read it. My life experiences have shaped me and how I react to students and families in the classroom. Definitely, absolutely. All of our life experiences shape how we react and what we do in our classrooms, as much as no one really acknowledges that, right? So I'll keep going, but think about, we'll have another chime to also reflect shortly. Oops, sorry, one sec. There we go. So I do want to talk a little bit about the progressive pedagogy that I use, or that centers my work, or that frames my work as an early childhood educator, and that is the Reggio Emilia approach, which does come out of Italy. And it is an approach that came out of the devastation in Italy and Europe after World War II. A group of citizens in Reggio Emilia, which is in the northern part of Italy, got together and amidst the rubble, literally, decided that they wanted to create schools, or a school at that time, for the youngest citizens. And they decided to focus on the youngest citizens to prevent history from repeating itself, basically. They wanted to prevent fascism from taking hold again, totalitarianism from taking hold again, and they believed that the way to get to this was through the youngest children, the youngest citizens, and to really help them become citizens of the world, citizens that are democratic, citizens that are curious and ask questions and doubt, and all of these things that are a part of democracy, but are not part of things like fascism and totalitarianism. So brick by brick, they built this school. I think they sold like a tanker or something from leftover from the war, and built this school literally brick by brick. And it was the first known secular school in Italy, because they didn't want the church to be involved in this school for the same reasons as mentioned before. So that's just a quick overview of Reggio, but some of the really important elements that I think tie into teacher identity, and how this work of you reflecting on yourself as a human being, your stories, can really lead into curriculum development and to lead into learning experiences for your students. Whether or not you're at a Reggio school, which are very rare, so I'm guessing that you're not, but you can really help shape your curriculum by using some of these elements, sort of infusing some of these ideas into the work that you do, even if you do have to follow a box curriculum. So some of the really important pieces of Reggio that I think apply to this idea of teacher identity are teacher as a researcher. And that's the article that I did email out. So that's just some thoughts from Carlina Rinaldi, which she was the director of the schools. Now there's more than one school. There's many schools in Reggio Emilia only. And she was the leader of those schools for a while, and now she's a consultant. And then learning as negotiation, right? So learning as co-construction. And so in the article, there's a lot of discussion about letting doubt and error, crises, confusion really be part of your work. I know as educators, we're told you have to know, the answer, you have to be very sure, you have to lead the children, and you have to be certain all the time. So that doubt is not supposed to be part of our regular work as teachers. But the Reggio Emilia approach really invites that in. It really invites you as a teacher to be part of this learning, to be part of the researcher, to be part of the construction of this knowledge. And as learning as being an interaction between the humans in that space. So that's why it's so critical that you know who you are, or at least you've started the process of thinking about yourself and who you are and your stories, because you want to come as a fully authentic human being into that space, so that when you're walking alongside young children and any children in that learning, you're both fully authentic and you're both able to have that human dignity that was discussed in the article. When children are given the opportunity to be their authentic selves in your classroom, they feel human. They feel like they have dignity, especially our youngest children. But I would guess this applies to all children, because our children are told what to do. They're told where to sit. They're told where to be. They don't have a lot of agency, unfortunately, in our society. And in your classroom, you really can give them that agency and really give them that humanness back by creating this space where you're co-constructing the knowledge. So your self-reflection is key to this as you enter this work as a whole human being, someone that is full of questions, just like they are, full of doubts, just like they are. Working with the youngest children, it's always so surprising to me, the questions and the curiosities and the doubts that they have are often concepts that people would never think young children think about. I remember last year we had a student who talked about death all of the time. We're talking about a 3-4-year-old child. All of his pretend play was about death. All of his stories were about death and dying and blood and gore and all of these things. And we had a conversation with mom just to make sure that everything was good at home, right? And she assured us everything was fine at home. But it was just, and this is common. This child was not an uncommon story. I have many children who deal with these really intense topics. And so you as an educator, if you come into this space with your identity work happening already, when a child comes to you with these really difficult, complex thoughts, you can co-construct this knowledge together as fully authentic human beings. One of the other pieces to the approach that Amelia Gambetti, she's another one of these Reggio folks, talks about how your understanding and every individual person's understanding is just a piece of the total understanding. So that's why it's so important to engage with each other as your students and your children and you as the teacher, student to student, teacher to teacher, engaging and co-constructing this knowledge, because you only have one piece of the puzzle. You only have one piece of this piece of artwork, right? You only see this corner of the artwork, but maybe your student, the children in your classroom, maybe they see this piece. And then maybe your colleagues see this piece. And then maybe yourself, you see another piece, right? So everyone has just one piece of the understanding. And that's why it's so important to engage with the children in this co-construction of knowledge, because you may understand something one way, but your children may understand something in another way. And putting that understanding together, negotiating this learning together, is really where that deep thinking is happening, that life-changing, revolutionary work is happening, especially when you start to think about things like racism and sexism and all of those things, and identity. So one of the other pieces of Reggio, and I was talking about that a second ago, but is this idea of progettazione, which is this idea of self-reflection being part of the negotiation and the construction of learning. So all of these little magnifying glasses are all of the people in the classroom, and everybody is looking at things and thinking about things in their way and sharing that with each other. You create this community. Everybody's humanness counts, everybody's stories counts, and putting that all together to really develop the learning, to construct that learning together. So we're returning to this image of the prism, and we're going to put together this idea of progettazione, or design thinking, co-construction of learning. And we see how vital your identity work is for both you as a teacher and the students, right? To have a complete image, to see the whole painting. Each participant in the classroom has to shape the curriculum and has to have a voice in shaping the curriculum to be able to bring their whole authentic selves, right? This is really the kind of curriculum that is change making for pre-K all the way up to high school and beyond. It really can be a moment where children finally feel human, which we talked about earlier. And you as an adult, right, as you're working on this identity and encountering these things that are really difficult, traumatic, that make you sad, just like I felt when I thought about my experiences as a sink or swim student and not having bilingual ed. You're really forced to encounter your subjectivities, your limitations, and then building that understanding together with your students as you're encountering your subjectivities and your limitations. So yeah, acknowledging your bias, your limitations, your subjectivities, and working towards transcending that. We're trying to get beyond just understanding yourself and beyond reacting when children say things that are very difficult or challenging, and transcending that. And that's really what can make you a revolutionary educator. So we have some time. I know we don't have a ton of time, but to have a little bit of a conversation. So I don't know if anyone did get a chance to read the little excerpt from this book, and I highly recommend this book. Is very, very what's the word? It's just very good. I can't think of another word for it, but it's just a really good book for early childhood educators to think about fearless conversations. And how your identity really can be part of that fearless conversation with toddlers, but any children again. So Nick Terrones is a Latinx educator out on the West Coast, I believe in Colorado maybe, or Seattle, something around there. And this book is about really him grappling with these things, these questions, these really tricky questions when a child says things like, does the wormy have a penis, right? And, if you haven't spent any time on your identity and you haven't really started to reflect on how you feel about these sort of topics, your reaction probably would be, no, we're not talking about that, or just kind of brushing it aside or moving it along. But he has spent a lot of time on his identity and self-reflection and worked, co-constructed this knowledge with this student about worms and penises and gender, and these really sort of things that you wouldn't think that a toddler would be able to have those conversations, right? So I want, this is another moment of self-reflection, to think about a moment in your career as a teacher that's similar to this, right? Is there a moment when a student said something that really took you aback, that you brushed off, that you ignored, which is completely fine. And I have an example for you of my own so that you don't feel bad about these moments, right? Because you do, what's that saying of Toni Morrison's, right? You do better when you know better, right? So I know better now, but in the moment, this story is of a student, a Latinx student, during a lockdown drill. And so all teachers probably know this, but the lights are off, the shades are drawn, And the principal or security guard or whoever in the building walks through the building and wiggles the knob of all of the doors to make sure the doors are closed. Sometimes they, maybe with older children, they'll knock on the door really hard, simulate somebody breaking in or somebody entering the building and wanting to cause harm. And so we were in a lockdown drill. The lights were off. We were under the table. And the student says to me, after the wiggling of the knob and the knocking of the door, he says, "It's the Black people. They're coming." And he was terrified. And in that moment, my reaction was, oh my God, this child is racist. He comes from a racist family. Oh my God, how could he have these thoughts? I really had that strong reaction to his comment, and I didn't co-construct with him in that moment. I didn't reflect with him in that moment. I didn't pause and say, you know what, we're going to have a conversation about that later. Whatever it was, I just brushed past it and kept going. And never returned to that conversation with that child. And so that was a moment that was really lost with him as a human being, right? And to have that moment of mirrors, not during the lockdown drill, right? But after, right? To have that moment of windows of exposing him to and having conversations about Black people. So that's my example. And so if anyone else has an example or something similar that happened to them that they'd like to share in the chat or out loud, please feel free. I see some folks are thinking, scratching their heads.
Estela sounds like she would be willing to share.
Yeah.
Well, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I apologize if my little one starts screaming. She's right here. I'm letting her deal with my phone. So I was trying to think what happened right before this situation. I also teach in a dual language classroom, in a preschool classroom. And I don't remember exactly what happened that triggered this. But all of a sudden, this 4-year-old African-American kid yelled, "I hate white people." And I don't know what triggered. I can't remember what happened, but it was when you, Jessica, were explaining this, kind of brushed it off and didn't come back. Like, my first instinct was like, yeah, we are, I don't know how to explain it. Like, oh, sorry. It's like who knows where that came from, like what conversations he's hearing, what things are happening in his context. But I didn't know in that moment, I didn't know how to talk to him through that. So we talked about, I remember talking about emotions, and I helped him kind of move on in that moment. But we didn't go back to the talking about race and racism and then I thought about, should I talk to the mom? Should then I talk to the mom? And that was also, I'm like, I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, and then I talked to my partner, and I'm like, yeah, I was like, yeah, white people are terrible. I would be screaming that too. Like, I don't remember in what moment this happened, but I'm like, so I just didn't know what to do. And I always remember that situation as a really missed opportunity. And I don't know. I just, when you shared your example, it really brought me back to that moment. I'm like, totally lost opportunity to talk, I don't know, to learn, to, grow as a teacher. So yeah, that's all I have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Estela, for sharing. Absolutely. And those moments stay with you, right? Like forever. I will remember this moment, and I'm sure Estela will to her whole career, right? Of like, darn, what could we have learned together had I just had that reflective moment to myself and sat with that comment of that child? We aren't going to have the answer right away. And it's okay to say to children, I'm not sure. I don't know. Let's think about it. Let's research it. Let's talk about it. Or why do you think that? Right? If we had just asked, both Estela and I had just asked those children, why do you think that? Why do you think it's the Black people coming? to open the door, right? Why do you think that, you know, why do you not like white people, right? Like just asking them for that initial conversation of like, why do you think that, could have led us to deeper explorations, deeper moments of learning for our children. And had both of, you know, if I had reflected on myself of like, how do I feel when people of color, particularly when people of color are racist, how that affects me and how I react right away to that, and where that comes from, right? Thank you, Estella. I'm sure we all have examples similar, right? So Nick Terone says in the book, understanding myself helps me be intentional in the many decisions I make each day as a teacher, right? So again, that intentionality, we want to get beyond reacting to the children to intentionally responding and constructing meaning with them. And it increases my capacity to understand the perspectives and experiences of other people. So for democracy to thrive, right, this is what the folks of Reggio really understood. For democracy to thrive, the members of the democracy really need to be able to talk and think about different experiences, perspectives, values in a way that is conducive, right? Where multiple perspectives are okay, where everyone's view of that painting is right, is relevant, right? Nobody's right or wrong. It's not black or white. And to be able to have these conversations that are very difficult is really where our democracy can thrive, and again can affect beyond, right? Change history, especially in this moment of history that we're sitting in our country, and grappling with these things again as we grapple with them over and over again. And you know, I have hope that maybe the grappling this time will lead us a little bit further, not completely to where we need to be, but maybe a step further. And then Carlina Rinaldi in that article says the unknown, doubt, error, crisis, theory, and confusion, they're not usually a part of our school work, or daily life. If they do enter into the context, sorry, missed letter there, of life in the school, they are viewed as weak moments. And so really coming to terms with that as a teacher, it's not a weak moment when you say to the students, I don't know, or ask them, why do you think that? And having that doubt in yourself, like, oh, did I, you know, respond to that well, and why didn't I? Is not a moment of weakness, but rather a moment where you're becoming a stronger educator. So these are just some thoughts. I know we have 10 minutes left. So thoughts for starting points. I know when I go to PD, I always want to know, like, okay, what do I do now? So just my thoughts. Again, you can attack this however you want. Maybe you want to read this book, right? A Can of Worms. Maybe you want to engage with that article I sent out. Or maybe you want to look at this book, which is where this quote is from. Ann Palo and Margie Carter wrote this book, From Teaching to Thinking. And it's pretty dense, so it's a good summer read maybe, but and really have this thinking protocol in the book about which is a lens for deeper understanding and decision making as a teacher, right? And so their thinking lens is to know yourself and open your heart to this moment. It's almost like a mantra, if you will, as a teacher, right? Know yourself, open your heart to this moment. Nick Terrones has his own thinking protocol that he uses as he reflects and tries to grapple with the learning and engaging with the students as human beings, right? So bringing yourself into the classroom, right? Not erasing yourself from the classroom. I think a lot of teachers teach the content and don't bring themselves into it. What's your experience with that content? What are your understandings with that content? And I think that's where you really connect with your students. So that we're moving again into conscious teaching, into mindful teaching, mindful of your subjectivity. We can't erase our subjectivities. We can't get rid of our biases, but we can be conscious of them and mindful of them as we encounter our students, as we engage as teachers. And Lisa Delpit writes, we do not really see through our eyes or ears, or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs, right? And so again, you're that prism that allows children to see and hear things, or does not allow children to see and hear things, right? Are you going to be a glass prism, or are you going to be a dark opaque, not transparent prism. Make a choice. But I think as a social justice oriented teacher and as an anti-racist teacher and as teachers who really want to change not only our students but history, I think this is really important work and something that we can begin to engage with bit by bit as educators. And so one of the other things I would say before I go to that last slide is to find someone, right? A teacher, maybe in your building, maybe not, maybe a friend who's a teacher, or find someone who can be your doubting buddy, right? Your error buddy, your identity buddy, somebody that you can work together with, because you really need another human, right? To start this reflection. Obviously you reflect on yourself, but you need to have these conversations out loud with somebody like, wow, I really, I grew up in a household that was very Catholic. Again, I'm going back to that example. And I was taught, homosexual people were bad, right? And why do I think, and do I still believe that, right? Again, I'm not saying your biases are wrong per se, but bringing them into the classroom, and like, how do you bring them into the classroom, and how do you engage with students, and how do you get to this social justice work, right? I would suggest, obviously, you leave those things behind, right? Like, but understand them and understand your identity, and not let them influence what you let children see and what you let them hear. And so being mindful of that subjectivity and those biases. So find a buddy. So you have the potential to change history in your work alongside young children. Is where I will leave you. And I know we only have 5 minutes, but we do. I think this is such important work, and self-reflection is one of those really big pieces of that. So if anyone has questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, I know we didn't get a chance to talk about the article or the book. So if anyone had any burning thoughts about either piece as well, I'm going to stop sharing, but I do have these resources. I don't know if should I leave these. Those are the books. Well, these will come in an email that you'll get. So I can stop sharing and we can have a quick little moment if anyone wants to.
So Jessica, we do have one question in the chat about
Sure.
procuring the book. Do you see that? Tara's looking.
Yes. Which book? So actually, I should say both of these books are available through the Child Care Exchange. So it's a, I guess it's like a company, or I don't know how to call it really, but Exchange Press. So if you just Google the titles, it'll pop up and you order through them, these books. And they're, regular price, I would guess. The bigger one is, more expensive, obviously. But yeah, so Child Care Exchange. I don't think they sell their books on Amazon. So that's why you have to go through them. Yes, thank you, Estela. She put the link in the chat.
Real quick. So Jessica, I really appreciate this as a mom. I have a junior in high school in CPS. My other son is a graduate of CPS. I volunteer in CPS. I've given money to CPS. When I was a kid, this is like 5,000 years ago, in 1977, I went to a school that just became integrated. So Black students were being bused in to the school. And it was a mind-blowing experience as a 6, 7-year-old, because there were parents who were very angry that Black students were coming to this school. And I remember very clearly my teacher, Sister Dolores, a nun, obviously, her correcting kids and saying, we're not talking like that, or everyone's welcome here, or our differences make us stronger, or God loves everyone. And it, I'm almost 50, and this is like in my brain, will never go away. And, it was a teacher, and then of course my own parents, who inspired me to think differently about people who are different. And so when I hear you talking about this in 2021, in part, it's disappointing because it's, again, I'm almost 50, but it's also really inspiring because I want more and more students to feel welcome and included in school. And so I just, my personal feelings of gratitude, but then I just appreciate you, you know, it takes some level of vulnerability. And I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, KJ. That was so beautifully stated.
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you so much. I
Absolutely.
definitely want to give space. We have a few more minutes, so if anyone has another question or comment, feel free to speak up. But Jessica, I do want to thank you. It's a, you know, this is a vulnerable space, and but hopefully a safe one, and hopefully one where everyone felt comfortable to listen and be a part of it in the way that made sense to them. It's such important discourse that needs to be happening much more often. And so we're so happy to have you. It looks like Angelica has a question. Would you like to unmute yourself? There we go.
Hi. I wanted to see, Jessica, how is there any strategy you have to make parents feel welcome and approachable with you? And then when these questions arise or these issues, it is a safe space and it's not a judgmental kind of perspective on things. I'm a preschool teacher myself, and of course, being in early childhood, they tell us stories about home life that are very tragic, and you know, and you don't know how to deal with it. Whether it's cultural, whether it's abused on different levels, and besides reporting it, but also what they witness. What can you? So like, I always try to build bridges with parents in the beginning of the school year, just so I know that I'm on their side, that we know they understand that we're a team. And so when we have these difficult issues or a circumstance come up, it comes from a positive place versus a judgmental space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, in that little cycle that I had at the beginning, I would add family identity to that piece. You know, I was thinking that through, but I absolutely think that it's incredibly important to also center your families, right? Center their stories and their experiences and invite them into this identity work. It was easy to do, at least for our classroom virtually, because they were there, right? So I could say, you know, every Friday, families have to be there. We're going to engage and work together. So I had almost like a captive audience, right? But I think once we go back, you know, next year, inviting them to share their stories in some way, right? So maybe doing a workshop with a family and child workshop, and you sneak in some of that identity work so that the families feel just as human, right? We were talking about that, just as centered, just as important in this construction of knowledge. This is one of the big keys of the Reggio approach, is family and community. But that's something that all pre-Ks, whether or not you're Reggio, right, can bring into the community of inviting families, and not just inviting them for the open house or the literacy night or the math night, right? But really inviting them in to engage in that important work of identity. So one of the things that we do every month is draw a self-portrait. The children draw their self-portrait. They think about themselves, well, you know, all of that, right? And we invite families to also do a self-portrait, right? So adults really rarely ever are given that time to think about themselves, to really consider what they even look like that day, right? Because as parents, you throw something on, you run out of the house, whatever, right? But if you give them that time and that space to engage in that same identity work, I think that's one of the keys to providing that safe, welcoming environment for families.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I hope that answered somewhat of your question.
It did, because I can relate that parents were alongside us the whole year, or for most of it, and we welcomed them, right? Oh, thank you for your help. I always was thankful for them, and we got to see a little bit of the family dynamics and give them grace, just like they extended grace to us when things weren't always going I think I felt the most collaboration this year because
Absolutely.
parents were with them side by side and they didn't have to struggle so much. And I always thank them, and I always say, thank you for being such a partner. Thank you for being supportive, having them ready. And so they really played an integral part, especially this year, all the parents, when we stayed remote for so long.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. And one of the things that we started to do with the children in the building, and I want to keep doing this next year, I'm going to hold myself to it, is inviting the families virtually every Friday. So they come in virtually, they join us in story dictation work. So the children tell adult stories, and then on Friday they dramatize them, and we're dramatizing them with the parents, right? The parents are there, they're invited into the classroom, they're part of that. Next year I want to have them start as adults to write stories and perhaps dramatize them themselves at home. Or so really like continuing to use this virtual space that we now know we have, right? And we know how to use, and continue to invite our families into the classroom, even now that we're not in their homes with them. They can be in our homes, if you will, in our classrooms with us and with their children.
I love that, Jessica. That's something that wouldn't have happened probably without.
No, never, right? Never.
Those silver linings of, despite how trying.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. It's 5:33, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and knowing that it's the evening now, and so hopefully you have something to do and people to be with whom you love, or animals or whatever. But Jessica, again, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Glad to have you back. So for those who don't know, Jessica did a community chat with us on the very early end of this initiative back last June. She didn't really talk about it today, but she has this wealth of knowledge and amazing experience set around nature play. And like we said in her intro that, she's presented on it nationally and internationally. She, if you ever are interested in that, or you already are interested in it, she is the one to talk to. So certainly reach out if you want to connect.
Yes.
But Jessica, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
And for all of you, thank you for joining us and being a part of this. I know, again, it's very tough to do something after a full day of work, and especially in June. Like, I feel like we're cruising for a bruising having some of these chats in June. But it's nice to be able to record them, and now we have them. We'll have them cataloged, and all of our chats. So this again is our 22nd chat since last April. All of them are cataloged and archived on our website. So Kayla popped that link into the chat box, and we'll also share it with you within the next couple of days, along with Jessica's deck. So if you have any questions or you need anything, never ever hesitate to reach out to CFE. We're a very small but mighty staff, and we are always happy to hear from our educators and from the community. So if you are missing something or there's a gap and we can help fill that, that's really sort of why we exist, to help empower and build up you and your students and your school communities. So that is it for us, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. Jessica, thanks again.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.